Welcome everyone to another episode of Smart Talks by the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. I'm Elizabeth Smart and I'm joined today by my co-host Mio Strong, and I am personally so excited to have two amazing women on this episode today. Dr. Bailey, who has a PhD in psychology. She has over 35 years of experience. I mean, she has held various positions of wow, I was going to say power and control, but I'll just say incredible positions. She's worldwide renowned, worldwide respected, and it's a real honor to have her on today's episode. We also have someone who, anyone who is a survivor recognizes her name and looks up to her as a hero, and anyone who learns of her story also would recognize her as a hero. And it's someone who I personally have followed for a long time, and I am filled with so much admiration for her. I mean, I could go on for like years and years telling you how much admiration I have for her, but she's a fellow survivor. Her name is Jaycee Duggard, and she is the founder and president of the Jaycee Foundation. And I'm just so excited to have both of you with us today. And today's topic is something that I know I've been accused of. I'm sure Jaycee has been accused of, but what's more exciting is that Jaycee and Dr. Bailey and Dr. Porges have all been working together in collaboration to take this topic and take it out of this dark, sort of misperceived perspective and bring it into the light and show it what it actually is. That topic is wrongly named, but what we know it as Stockholm Syndrome. And so diving right in, Dr. Bailey, can you start off and tell me what is the correct name for Stockholm Syndrome?
So after a bunch of years talking to individuals like you and Jaycee, particularly my conversations with Jaycee, we began to think, what is this amazing skill that allows people to stay alive and move beyond extreme circumstances? And so at first for a while, I think we were calling it accommodation. What does that mean? You accommodate to the perpetrator. Finally, in our work with Dr. Porges, and after we sat down over a meal, he came up, I think it took 8 years, came back and said it's appeasement. And appeasement is what you see even in animal behavior with other mammals. So that when they're in a position of feeling threatened, there's certain physiological responses they'll do in response to the perceived threat. So the word that we are announcing and wanting people to use and understand it resonated with you and other folks is appeasement. So from here on out, we ask people, when you hear the word Stockholm, to say, no, we call it appeasement.
And can you explain what that means exactly?
So appeasement is basically a physiological response to life threat, which, to get off on another technical note, it comes from a vagal nerve response, which is a response that is beneath a fight or flight. It's a little complicated, but when, as humans, and other mammals, we have a dorsal vagal, which is a complete shutdown, the freeze. And you hear many individuals, maybe as with you guys, initially there's a real shutdown. And then the autonomic nervous system often goes to fight or flight. And then above fight or flight is what we call the ventral vagal, ability to socially connect. It is a physiological reaction. It is not something that you can teach someone to do through their brain. It's a physiological piece. So appeasement is basically something, and I'm going to ask you, Elizabeth, you said something really brilliant when I said to you, well, how did you stay alive? What did you understand initially? And do you remember what you said to me?
Yeah, I remember when we had that conversation, just saying, well, I figured that it's harder to kill someone that you like. And so if I can do everything I can to make him like me, then maybe he won't kill me. And that's what I did.
And would you, Jace, would you say the same thing?
I would totally agree. I mean, I wanted him, my perpetrator, Philip Garrido, to like me. I wanted Nancy Garrido to like me. And why I thought that at the time, I have no idea. when I would do therapy with Dr. Bailey, we would always talk about like I adapted to survive my circumstances, you know, something in me adapted really quickly to figure that out. And like looking back, it saved my life.
You know, one of the things I look a lot at is that when we look at prisoner of war, within the circumstances, or even if we look at during Nazi Germany, these people did not fall in love with their perpetrators, and nobody would ever accuse them of falling in love with their perpetrators. They did what they needed to do to survive. And even now, sometimes when we train people, if they're ever held hostage in foreign countries, what we know is after that slim period of potential to get away, which is very slim when you're being overpowered, in order to survive, the person who's screaming and yelling and fighting is not the one who is going to be saved. In fact, they're the person who often are times the first to be killed or whatever it is. And the hard part about it is that can be a reflective action. I've many times known before I met individuals like you guys that I probably would scream and yell and cry because that's my reflex place to go. And so notion of appeasement is complex and also can save people's lives too. But it's not about love. It's so important we rid the world of that notion.
One of the things that I really loved, and to reflect back on the conversation that we had when I last saw you in person, was when you said that this was really taking a look at it from the victim side instead of continually looking at it at the perpetrator side. And I think I feel like that I feel like as a community and really as a nation, and it's probably worldwide actually, that we tend to look at things through the perpetrator's eyes rather than the victim's eyes on hold. Do you think, would you agree with that? Do you think that's true?
100%, because we're so used to that perspective. And, without going off on a huge tangent, I think some of it is because of the male-dominated perspective often on circumstances like this. And I think that when we explain it as a type of love, it confuses the picture, and it does come from the perpetrator. Again, I think Jaycee said it really well to me. How have you said it when somebody mentioned, were you in love with him? What did you say? Do you remember?
Never.
Well, what she said, and I love this because she looked at whoever this person was, and she said, I dare you to spend 1 week with Philip Garrido and tell me you feel love. Yeah. And I love that because it's like, I'm sure you feel the same way, Elizabeth. It's like.
And on the other hand, like you have our families that we, thank God we got to come back to, but what does it do to them when they hear that we have Stockholm Syndrome, like from the perspective of a mom or a dad, like I don't want my family to think that I was ever in love with the person that kidnapped me. So in that respect, it's really derogatory too.
Yeah, that's actually a perspective I've never even thought of, but I feel like I have a vague memory, maybe a day or two after I came home. It's pretty vague. Some of those early days, they kind of blurred together in my memory.
Same, yeah.
Honestly, kind of feel like maybe my mom, it wasn't so much that she was asking me if I loved my captors, but I can't even really remember. It's just sort of a vague, half fuzzy memory that's kind of there of her just saying that like the past was in the past and we didn't have to talk about anything, but if I wanted to, I could, and that I spent a long time with these people, so she was there for me if I wanted to talk about anything with her. But then I remember shortly after that, maybe it was definitely within the first couple of years that I was home. I want to say it was within the first couple of months of me being home, that there was a newspaper article that came out, and it was Brian Mitchell saying it must have just been days also after I got home. It was when he said, well, she's my wife. In God's eyes, she's 18 years old. And if it weren't for these bars, she'd be down here with me right now. And I remember being absolutely mortified when that hit the news, when that was being reported on. I remember being so embarrassed and I remember my dad, I think he was at a press conference. I think Brian Mitchell actually may have said that to my dad. The details, like I said, are kind of fuzzy, but I just remember being like so mortified and so embarrassed about it all. And just like, and I felt like then that even kind of spurred on this thought that I'd been in love with him, that, like I believed everything he said. And inside me, I was like, no, I did not love him. Like, gross.
Exactly.
Like never held a boy's hand in my life prior to even up until that point. So, and he's like, oh yeah, she loves me and she's my wife. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what are you saying? Why are people listening to this? And I was mortified about it.
That's a piece where we hear sometimes talking heads talking about, there's a confusion of love for mother and father. And it's like, I remember sitting actually in a hotel room with Jaycee. We were traveling, talking somewhere, and there was someone talking about Castro and how the girls had a love for him like a father or mother during the trial.
They called it a parental love.
And we were just, jumping up and down and shouting at the television together. And that was part of what really helped move us. So like, we've got to get people to understand. I get DAs and people like this that reach out saying, I need you to explain why somebody doesn't leave. And that's like one of the single most important contribution that needs to happen from the field is people don't leave because they're scared. People don't leave because they don't know an option. People don't leave because there's this huge, huge desire to survive and to live. And if you don't know that there's any other way to stay alive, and you guys both did have families to go back to. I know that even when Jay first came back, it was scarce. Resources were scarce. Finding housing initially where she could be safely. She had wonderful family, but there was so much press around there. So for many people initially, there is this challenge of where can I go to be safe to get away once they're away from the aggressor.
Well, even I didn't feel like comfortable even talking until I knew Philip was behind bars.
Right.
Like it took a really long time for me to even tell him my name because I was afraid that I was going back to Philip Garrido.
That's like Rosalind, the one woman we worked with who it took 2 years for him to be picked up. And she lived in fear every single day. Although she would never have said she loved him either.
No.
But she was terrified and she did feel protective enough by her family and people around her. But
this is a woman that the Jace Foundation has helped after she was kidnapped. What, for
20 years.
20 years. Beat me. Yeah. If it's a competition. Not.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she's an amazing woman though, with 9 children.
But you guys, it's all about survival. I mean, the two of you, no question, not to take it away, you guys are both phenomenally amazing women. But, and again, not to take it away from you, but we have a tremendous desire to live and go forward. It's the life force inside of each of us, devoid of any spiritual understandings, whatever it is. We have the thrive, we want to thrive, we want to survive, we want to socially connect. When you're isolated and you're lonely and terrified, maybe you do appease the aggressor, because being alone is like being unbelievably vulnerable and scared, as you both know.
And that makes a lot of sense.
And I mean, do you feel like this applies to victims of domestic violence as well. I mean, unfortunately, kidnapping is not that uncommon. It does happen. But also there's like this huge percentage of women who, well, not just women, but a lot of women, a lot of people who experience domestic violence. And I think even for me initially, when I first started hearing about domestic violence, how these women, you know, they were smart, they were attorneys, they, you know, had high powered jobs across the board. It wasn't just, you know, based off of like your economic standing in the world or what neighborhood you lived in or anything like that. I mean, it was across the board. You know, they had cars and credit cards and they didn't leave. And part of me was just like, well, it's understandable why I wouldn't leave. I mean, my life was at stake with these women.
Right.
And now as I've learned more about it, I mean, this concept to me actually seems to apply to them as well, because now, and maybe Jaycee, you can speak to this as well, but now especially like as I have like grown and matured and looking back on what I experienced and really sort of almost reanalyzing what I went through, you know, I experienced both those physical chains and mental chains, just like the mental threats and the manipulation and just sort of living under that duress of night and day, you know, like I might kill you tomorrow, or I might kill you today, or I might not. So you better keep me happy kind of thing. Now I feel pretty strong in saying that, yeah, actually those mental chains are way stronger than actual physical chains. And I mean, does this conversation apply to those victims as well?
Do I take that?
I mean, I can't take it all, but I do agree with you that the mental chains of, you know, being in that kind of situation far, you know, outweigh the physical. Although I think they, you know, victims of abuse have physical as well. But yeah, the mental chains that I felt personally, I mean, like you said, analyzing them years later, I can see them. At the time, probably not. You know, I had a lot of other things on my mind too, like the welfare of my kids and, you know, like what was going to happen to them. And so like mentally, it was like I was physically chained.
And I think it's really important that we do absolutely understand that it relates to a variety of populations where you don't know how to survive out of the context you're in.
Mm.
And, you know, there's
I'm familiar with safe.
what is familiar, and as humans and mammals, you know, we connect in herds or pods or whatever it is. And it's so when we have this connection to not know how we can make it out of that greater world, there's so many different ways that this applies. And you know, again, understanding it's all about safety and the importance of being able to connect. The hard part about right now, many parts about COVID right now, is the lack of predictability. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that might make it easier for all of us is to know we're all in it together, right? You know, there's a common experience that we're doing. So when you feel like, speaking even as a psychologist, when I feel like I'm about to go over the cliff and like, I can't take this anymore, I go, oh yeah, we're all in this. And that makes it a little bit easier. So the drive and the strive to connect is also part of the feeling of feeling safe and secure. So trafficking, domestic violence, abduction, I mean, we found in so many situations when people come out of a situation, particularly like in trafficking, and I know you've done some work with trafficking, what do you do this? How do you pay the bills after? You know, as important as going back, you know, we would all think, well, why wouldn't you get as far away from the situation as you can? But if you don't have any skills and you don't know how to pay the bills and you don't know how to live, it makes sense that you might gravitate back into a situation. But I think to call it love is where it's we need to change that verbiage, because as we know, and then I'll stop going on, but even with Stephen Porges' wife, Sue Carter, talks about what is love. Well, love is a physiological response in our body that our brain then puts a narrative connected with it. And so in order to change the conversation, we also have to allow people to explain those feelings other than just love.
Well, and I mean, I love that you kind of came back to changing this name, because when someone even just says the word Stockholm Syndrome, I can just feel like my insides like bubbling up a little bit. I feel like my walls going up. I feel like just like barricading myself in and bulldozing over whoever says that to me, even just the word, even if it's in casual conversation, because then I want to say, no, I did not have that. Why are we talking about this again? No.
Yeah.
But now that you've explained, I mean, just in this conversation that we've had so far, now that you've explained, like, this is appeasement processing, that I'm like, yeah, I totally did that. That's how I survived. I think for me, and I'm curious about you, Jaycee, to see what you think, but I would venture also to say for other survivors is that Stockholm Syndrome has a very negative feeling associated with it, and a very negative, I guess, connotation associated with it, that like you don't have control over your brain, or like you don't have control over your actions because you're so enamored and you're so in love by the people who are hurting you. I mean, like, that just makes me want to go throw up in my toilet right now, just saying that. But then change it to appeasement, being like, no, like, this is actually a really good thing that you did. Like, you survived, like you did exactly what you were supposed to do, and you came out of it the other side. And now I'm like, yeah, I'll totally get on board with that.
Well, you take the shame out of it, like the shame factor for, I think, a lot of people. I know myself, like, shame can really make you feel like you're really small and have no place in this world. And it's getting that out of, saying that I love my perpetrator, or, like, it doesn't even make sense when you say it, but for some reason people have latched on to it and it's grown into this huge thing. Like, getting that out of here and just saying, I did what I had to do to survive. I appeased my captor to survive. There's no shame in that.
And the research isn't even strong on it. It was a media-driven statement that comes back, as many of us know, through a case of a Colleen Stan, that it was used in a trial to try to explain her reasons for not leaving. And then also bigger was in the Patty Hearst trial. And then it grew legs. I think what's also important, and you guys, this goes without saying, but I'm still going to say it, we need to understand is that the people that don't make it out are not responsible for not acting in a certain way. And we're not trying to say, oh, if you learn this, you too can survive a horrendous situation. We can say that we've learned from people like you guys and, some of the girls, Gina and those girls, Michelle, in Castro's situation, where there was an opportunity. But we also want to be very, very careful to understand for the families whose children have been killed, that it's not they did something wrong and therefore didn't get out. There are also individuals that are beyond appeasement. And in some ways, their psychotic belief that you two were in love with, the perpetrators believing that you both were in love with them somehow, and somehow may have saved your lives too. So we want to be careful to not ever make anybody feel like, if they had done this. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're right. I mean, there are some people out there that honestly, it wouldn't matter what you did. It wouldn't matter if you had all the money in the world. It just wouldn't matter what you did. Like, they're going to kill you no matter what. And I guess, like, victims have never done anything wrong, whether you survive it or not. I mean, the fault lies solely on the perpetrator's shoulders.
Yep.
I mean, like, no, you don't do anything wrong. I guess for me, it feels good having validation for my actions and not viewing it with embarrassment or shame, that, because I mean, I'm sure anyone who's had the opportunity to ask you, Jace, they've said something to the extent of, because maybe they haven't, but I definitely have been on the receiving end of this question so many times. But they'd be like, well, geez, you were gone for a long time. And right, 9 months is not 18 years. But it's time.
It always feels like a lifetime, no matter what.
Yeah, they'd be like, you're gone for so long. You're telling me you didn't have a single opportunity to run away. Why didn't you run? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you do something? You know, why? Like when you were brought out into public, why didn't you just like run to the nearest police officer? And it took years for me to understand why I hated those questions so much.
Yeah.
I mean, it like ate away at me, and it wasn't until I finally realized that it was because I heard it as, you should have run, and you should have tried harder, and you should have screamed, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done something more than what you have. You didn't do enough. So really, it's kind of your fault. You were gone for so long. I mean, I don't know.
Well, when I get those kind of questions, I like to say, you know, like, you can never judge anybody else's situation because you're not in it. Like, and in my case, I was 11 years old. I was thrown into a car and my life was taken away from me. And, you know, what I did after that, I did everything I could to survive. And then the lives of my children depended on me after that. And it just kind of rolled downhill. And luckily I was rescued and everything turned out okay and well, but like, that's not everybody's case, and we can't judge what other people do in other circumstances. It's just impossible.
Well, I think what's interesting from looking again at appeasement, if you look at the animal models, which is where Stephen Borges has done a lot of research on, I sound like I said Stephen Porges. Stephen Porges has done a lot of research on looking at autism and understanding the physiological, biological response. And if we look at animals, and this is the funny thing, I don't mean to refer to either of you as animals, but if you look at the difference between appeasement in a dog and a dog that just wants their belly rubbed, you'll see something very different. And that's one of the things that really surprises me. You'll see if a dog is frightened and cowering, it's very different than this open piece. And there may be some biological mechanisms that are similar, but there's also a very different piece, which is the fear of being harmed, the fear of being killed, of being hurt. And in both of your cases, you lived in a context, as you just said, Elizabeth, where you really didn't know what this person would do in the morning. You had to believe that it would be okay and that some sort of kindness or benevolence would save you.
Me too.
What blows me away is more people don't say, well, how could he hold you for 9 months? Or how could, I'm sure you guys agree, how could the wife stay involved for 9 months, 18 years?
Yeah, in both of our cases, we both had wives involved and they both held us when they could have let us go.
And to me, that's the interesting question. And so, when Jay has done some talking, sometimes I'll go along and, I'll, be chomping at the bit back there to want to step out and say, wait a second, you're asking the wrong question. That's ridiculous. I mean, you guys, look at you two. You're not exactly world wrestling. You're not exactly The Rock. And the idea that you guys...
Are you saying we can't break out of somewhere?
No, but I mean, like, duh, of course. It's loaded. There's no way. It's weird to me that we
were
ask
little girls.
And it's weird we ask that question of like, well, why wouldn't you leave? Or you could have gone.
It's because they've never been in the kind of situation that we're talking
about. Or it's so freaky for them to think of that.
Yeah.
Like, is it so scary?
So
it's like
fear involved in thinking about it.
I wrote this little book a while ago on, preventing abduction with kids, and people are so afraid of thinking that it could happen. It's so much easier to sort of eye it from the perpetrator or from another perspective. It's too bad. We need to
or say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And then you would have made it all better.
Right.
Thinking that maybe they could do the same thing and get away. Maybe,
right.
Trying to calm themselves.
And that doesn't change the fact that first 3 to 5 minutes, that there is that window, or there isn't, right? Or maybe there isn't. I don't think there was in your case. I don't think there was in your case. I don't think there was a window.
No, definitely not. mean, looking back, no, that night, I remember that whole night from the moment he like woke me up with his knife at my neck to, I mean, all the way. I mean, I was never left alone ever, actually. But I mean, they had, as soon as I was in camp, I mean, you know, he like performed his marriage ceremony to me and then raped me. And then, I mean, honestly, I don't know if I fell asleep or if I passed out, but the next thing I remember was opening my eyes. And before I was even like fully conscious, he had me chained up. So there definitely was never a moment.
And that's what's so amazing. They in both of your cases and other cases, they try to strip away every vestige of human dignity and, you know, fight and everything. But what they couldn't do, which is what's so interesting, is to strip away that kindness part, the part that said, you know what, all I can fight back with is who I am as a human being, and hope it's enough. And that's where I'm even blessed to be on this call right now. Like, wow, that's just such an amazing thing. And it's such an amazing thing, you know, kindness cures, right? Does it really? But it's, hold on to it. Yeah.
I would like to think that I am a kind person at heart, but actually when I was kidnapped, I thought of a girl who I was in junior high with, who literally everyone liked her. She was always happy. She was always smiling. Like popular girls liked her, and like she was friends with the girls who definitely were not popular. She was friends with everyone in between. And I think it's because she was probably the nicest girl in the school. And actually that's who I thought of when I kind of thought, oh, well, everyone likes her. So maybe that will apply here if I can get them to.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Wow, that is very interesting.
That's, I mean, there is power, isn't there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I had anybody that I thought of like that. I just knew that, you know, I got food when I smiled, or, you know, I, you know, got to use the bathroom when I was nice, you know, and nothing worked when I yelled. So.
But that's huge. I mean, you guys, that is like really higher level survival.
It's just deduction of
it is, but you
what's
know,
working and what's not working.
But one of the things, as you know, Stephen Porges talks about is survival. We used to say survival of the fittest is the strongest. It's not true. It's not true. Survival of the fittest can also be the kindness, and it's just very interesting. And we're seeing, I don't know if I could go off on an hour tangent, and I'm not, but that's really interesting. That's so important. That power of kindness and connection is huge. Again, doesn't mean you're responsible if it doesn't happen.
Exactly. And probably in domestic violence cases, I don't have any experience, but I would assume that kindness might not do something.
It's a whole nother kettle of fish in a discussion.
Yeah.
And there's a whole nother kettle of fish. But what we're still talking about is survival and safety.
Right.
And how do you keep yourself the safest?
Right.
And how keep yourself in a situation that appeases, again, appease. It goes back to that word. Did I say that word, appease, enough?
Appeasement.
Well, I always heard the quote, like, instead of survival of the fittest, it's survival of people who have the ability to adapt. And that's what appeasement is in these situations. It's adapting to stay alive. It's
right. I feel like we both adapted to survive what we were thrown at, you know? We adapted to survive our circumstances.
And I think the reason the appeasement word kind of when we were using adaptation, I think the reason appeasement kind of made more sense is that there is an animal model to understand it within mammals. So, you know, I love that you just said that, because we were like, for 6 years, we were saying adaptation. But as far as understanding it from a biological, physiological perspective, there's a word that already adds to that. So, but I think they're both important.
yeah. And the fight, flight, freeze, appease. I mean, I feel like that's a message that we can get out there that people can remember, that, you know, it works really well. I'm so glad you're on here talking about this. There's so many obviously I'm like appalled that people ask you that regularly, either of you.
And what we have to understand, we need to understand is that dorsal vagal part is the lower part of the dorsal, a part of the vagal nerve. And that's the thing that's sort of responsible for the autonomic processing. That's what's responsible for our digestion and all of that. It's a thing that just goes on normally throughout the day, unless we've got a problem, and then maybe you'll have digestion problems and things like that. And then above that is the sympathetic nervous system of fight or flight. Beyond, then you get to ventral vagal, which is the part that has to do with social connection. The vagus goes to the back of the brainstem. So understanding that it is the normal response to go into a dorsal vagal shutdown. It's the common word we often hear about is disassociation, which is a little bit even more of a milder version of the dorsal vagal shutdown. But I've worked with some rape victims who will remain into dorsal vagal for quite some time. And this is like just a funny thing I'm going to throw in. What I've learned, there's a big dialogue in the field about victim versus survivor. What is the right verbiage? What I've learned is to see yourself as a victim is very scary, to use that word. And so there's a process of first seeing yourself, allowing yourself to see yourself as a victim. Then you can move to see yourself as a survivor. But some people are so in that dorsal vagal still that it's very difficult. It's a physiological response. It's not a brain response. It's the place that says, this thing happened to me, I'm scared to death. If I see myself as a victim, it's even scarier than allowing, myself. At this point, I can't do that yet. I'm work with a young lady, very young lady, who's still struggling with, this happened to me. Because until she can acknowledge it happened and see herself as a victim, she can't move into the survivor. And then she has a choice if she wants to go to warrior or not, which is in some ways, it's what these two ladies are. They're warriors by choice, not because they have to. It's different if you're a warrior because you have to, but where, there's a part that is warriors. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Sorry to go off on that, but there's a lot of dialogue about victim survivor in the field right now. Which word to use? Well, yes, it's up to the individual, but we also need to understand that to see yourself as a victim takes some ability to feel safe enough, else it's really anxiety provoking. That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
I love that you said it's up to that person. I know, like, when a lot of people introduce me, they'll be like, oh, she was victimized, she survived, and now she thrives. And part of me is like, yes, I'm very happy in my life. I am very, I have a wonderful life, don't get me wrong, but there's a part of me that's like, I'm pretty proud to be a survivor. You could just say survivor and leave it there, like, end of story. Because to me, when I hear like the word survive, not that this is like purely personal. This is not on anyone else. But for me, part of me is just like, that sounds like such a strong word to me.
Mm-hmm.
I made it through whatever it was that I had to go through. Like, I made it to the other side. And I don't know, like, there are like all the TV shows like Survivor, or the UK has I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which is Survivor basically. Look up the episodes if you're super bored. No, actually I survive them, but regardless, like, in that, when you look at it almost from like this worldly view, it's a very positive thing. And sometimes when people are introducing me, I wonder why they think that I wouldn't be, why it needs to go on. Why couldn't they just say I'm a survivor and that's it?
But I've also heard young women, and I was consulting with someone from another country the other day who was talking about in a rape situation where even the judge was having trouble calling her a victim, even though it was a clear rape situation. And so semantically, that's really what we're talking about. A lot of times the judicial system dictates how we use words around situations like this, and then we adapt them into, like, Stockholm. It was used in the courts first, and so then suddenly everyone's using it. So the thought of what the word is also incredibly important.
Yeah. I think you're probably right there. That's a good point. I have so loved today's conversation. I think I could keep talking to you all day. I mean,
It was great.
We have a lot in common.
it's been so good.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you too.
You
And
guys are amazing.
like I've just loved every minute and the light that you've shown onto it. And I mean, I so admire both of you. And we're just about out of time. So I just want to quickly talk to the audience directly and just say, if you have been victimized, don't be ashamed of whatever it's that you went through. Don't be ashamed of whatever you had to do, because you're here. And that's a huge deal. And this whole conversation has been on a survival tactic, appeasement processing. And it doesn't mean that you love your captor. It doesn't mean that it was like a vacation, because I'll tell you firsthand, being kidnapped's not a vacation. It's not fun. Do not sign me up ever for it. But
Dude.
laughing, I'm laughing.
I just think you're sweet.
But for every person out there who is a victim or a survivor or whatever you class yourself as, be proud of who you are, be proud of what you've overcome, and don't give up. Keep going. Don't look back on what's happened to you with embarrassment or shame, because you have nothing ashamed of. If someone did something to you, that fault lies squarely on that perpetrator's shoulders. It does not matter if you are running down the street naked, drunk, out of your mind. That is never an invitation to be raped. That is never an invitation to be trafficked or kidnapped or anything else. So, I mean, I probably wouldn't recommend that behavior, but regardless of my recommendations, it's not your fault if something's happened, and it was never you asking for it. And the blame will always lie squarely on your perpetrator's shoulders. Yeah. So with that being said, I want to say thank you to everyone tuning in today's episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Bailey. Thank you so much, Jaycee. You're both just going to continue to be my heroes. You've been elevated to the next level of heroism.
Hey, I don't even know how I got there, but I didn't even have to do the hard stuff.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It was great talking to you. It was really nice.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you everyone again. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.